introduce myself. So my name is Margot Dodds in Lakeview, and that's been my name that I work under for years. But when I started writing books, many years ago I discovered that Margaret, which is my real name, means pearl, and Whitfield is my middle name, and I thought, Pearl Whitfield, what a great name for an old author. If I ever write a book, I'm going to use that name. This is long before I ever thought I would really write a book, but it just seemed like such a good name. So when I started writing books, I used that name. My first book is the blue one, and it started as just a little tiny nugget. I woke up in the morning and I could see this little story, a little tiny video of a guy named Ralph whose wife had died, and he pulls up the blind, he drives around with the dog in the truck, ends up in a little town, buys the mom and pop store, and it's a really little town. It's probably more like, I don't know if you'll know Paisley or Plush, or that size. And buys the store, and first day he opens the blind, and he sees this little girl on the porch steps. She's about 4 years old. There's nobody else around. Now it's a little town, but still. So he's never had children, and he goes out to try to make friends with her, and she doesn't say a word for a long time in the book. And I just thought, there's a story there. And so for a long time I wrote a story. And then after maybe 17 chapters, I would whisper, "I'm gonna write a book." But I would never say it loud. And now I'm pretty comfortable saying I write books and I'm an author. I'm in the process of another book. But that first one was a real process in overcoming the inner critic, and you can see I couldn't edit it, and I also tried to format it myself. So the first edition is like 650, 700 pages long, and then the second edition I've trimmed it a little, fixed a lot of typos, and hired somebody who knew what they were doing to format it properly. And so it's only 400 and some pages.
You could see quite a difference between the two of them.
Yes.
Sitting there.
Yes, you can. So I still have a couple of copies of the original, so if anybody wants to see.
I think that's what we have here to check out, is the original.
It's the thick one.
You may have it, because I think you may have purchased it, and then I donated one of the second editions. But sometimes libraries wouldn't take it because even the font was different. I mean, it was crazy. I had such a terrible time with formatting. You hit select all, doesn't work. So anyway, long story short, I write under Pearl Whitfield, and Pearl Whitfield has her own Facebook page. My daughter is very concerned because I talk about Pearl in the third person. I tell her it's okay, it's a good thing. So, and I'm happy to read a selection from each book if you want.
Can you tell us how your troubles between where you came up to this new font and
Well, it's actually the same font, but for some reason, I mean, I always thought I used the same font. I don't like a font with a lot of, I now know they're called serifs, those little squiggly things. I like something clean, easy to read. So I like the sans serif font, and I like Arial. And that's what I thought this first one was, but there's a few others that I don't even know how it got changed.
So you do all this, is your publishing, you have your own?
Well, I now hire somebody to do the formatting of it. But I have a legal entity called Ponderosa Sage in the state of Oregon, whose purpose is to publish books by Pearl Whitfield. These ones are on Amazon, and I'm considering making a move to Ingram Spark, but I don't know what it'll do to worldwide distribution on Amazon, so I haven't made that decision. I'm a couple of months away.
Do you have an ISBN, Library of Congress number and all that?
Yeah, well, Amazon will give you one. You can order them through the Library of Congress if you want for some significant amount of money. You can buy them by the each or by the dozen. To me, it was easier to just hit a button and they provide an ISBN. I don't know how it's different from other ISBNs. Yeah, feel free to.
So, do you self-publish?
So I'm self-published, which has made it difficult for independent bookstores because Ingram, now that they have their new platform called Spark for publishing self-published authors, they no longer support any other venue. So they don't provide an independent bookstore with the 60-40 split that they require in order to survive.
Did you ever apply to like Costco or anything like that?
No, I did give, I gave copies of The Storekeeper to, some big bookstore, I can't remember what it is in Bend.
Barnes & Noble?
Yes, that, Barnes & Noble. And never heard anything, but it came out during, it was COVID, happened right away, and so I think that when I handed it to the manager, they were just starting to, let people in.
Yeah.
I haven't done, mostly I've gone around and done readings in little libraries, because I like small towns, and I like libraries.
Are you still working as a nurse also?
No, I retired about 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago. My daughter lives in Cambodia, so the second book takes place in 12th century Cambodia. And it's based on an experience that I had in Siem Reap, which is the town near Angkor Wat. And I don't know if you know, there are many huge temple complexes in the nation of Cambodia, and some of them are also in Thailand, because during that period of time, all of Southeast Asia except northern Burma and a little bit of Vietnam were Cambodia, it was all Cambodia. Anyway, so when she first moved there and I went to visit, I spent weeks and weeks at the temples. I kept going back over and over to this one temple. I was just fascinated. It's quite an amazing thing.
What's the time frame for The Storekeeper?
The Storekeeper is modern day.
No, I mean, how much, is it a year?
It is just about a year. In other words, it starts when he arrives in town and is completed when, at the end of the year, 4th of July. And Apsara is the story of a little girl, her life story, in Cambodia in the 12th century. And she loves to dance and is chosen to be a dancer, to train to dance for the king. And so it's...
What is your writing habits? Do you write every day? And
No, I have no habits. My life has no regularity whatsoever. I actually have I did a presentation in Cambodia once for Nerd Night about, so you want to write a book. So the first step, you write the book, you edit the book, you publish the book, and then, if you want to, you sell the book. Good luck with that one. So the first thing to do if you're going to write, obviously you have to deal with the inner critic, whose job is to make you feel terrible about yourself and stop you from exploring life to the fullest.
he's harsh.
Yes, and sneaky. So what I discovered, I had done The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Do you know that book? The Artist's Way.
Yes.
The woman's named Julia Cameron, and the basic practice, well, you make a commitment for 3 months, except that knowing that I have a life with no regularity in it, I said as long as it took 8 years for me to finish the book and finish all the exercises in the book. A friend of mine who's an artist in Vermont, I was talking with her, and she said, "You did all the exercises?" She's been an artist her whole life, that's how she lives. said, I just did the ones I want. Never occurred to me. But the bottom line practice in this book is you write morning pages, and you don't read them. You put your pen to the paper and you write. It doesn't matter what you write. I hate this. Why did I ever agree to this? This is so boring. I can't stand my thoughts. Oh, look, there's a squirrel. And just write and write and write, 3 pages longhand every day. And then you put them in an envelope and you don't look at them again. Because it's about the writing and the letting yourself write. It's not about grammar, it's not about style, it's not about idea. It's just about letting go of that inner critic. And that was really helpful. And this is another thing for me that's really important. If anybody who's in Al-Anon or AA knows, if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, halt. Take care of whatever that is, because you will act out if you don't. Whatever your particular happy form of acting out is. It could be spending money, it could be drinking, it could be not writing, whatever. Do you write at the same time every day? Many writers do. Many writers are famous writers, Stephen King and whoever, they all, they get up and they go to their studio or their office or whatever. They've got rituals, they've got props, they sit down and they write. And I don't. I write when I'm ready. And sometimes I have to make myself sit down and be ready. But it can be months. And then I don't know if I'm gonna like the story, and I don't know if my characters are gonna talk to me. And so far, I like the stories, and the characters talk to me. Schedule and routine. A lot of people have, again, they have very specific practices that work for them. So, rituals, props. And some people, they're various, compliance, standards, practices, rules, regulations, and other people just set their tent up under a tree. That's me. I set the tent up under the tree. Do you have to write a certain number of words every day? And again, there are writers who write a certain number of words. They don't stop until they've done that. But I just write until whatever I'm working on, it's usually a chapter. Most of the time I'll write a chapter at a sitting, and it could be maybe 4 to 6 hours. I write until it's done, whatever that little section is. And I don't decide in advance what I'm gonna write, because it's more like waiting to see a movie. The movie starts and I try my best to write down what people are doing and saying and what it looks like and smells like. Other people outline, I can't remember her name, very famous author. She writes really well, but she outlines everything minutely. And again, I don't have any idea what's gonna happen. My style of writing is to listen inside to what's gonna go on. And I'm often shocked, absolutely shocked by what happens, because I find it works better. If I impose my will on a story, it just gets leaden. If I let it come forth, it's okay. So anyway.
No, I get that. Do you take what you put on paper on Tuesday and move it further along in the book?
Almost, well, I haven't so far. The book I'm working on currently is, I don't exactly know, I may end up just, because right now it starts in 1889 in a hospital run by nursing sisters in Vancouver, Washington. But the next chapter is 1830s in Southern Illinois. And then, it jumps around so that the character, partly because I absolutely hate this main character, it's been really hard to write. It's called The Confession. And in the first chapter, this horrible guy is wanting to make his confession, and the nursing sister is like, oh gosh, preserve me. I don't want to hear it. But anyway, so, look, how did I get off on that? Tangents. So, I don't know what's gonna happen with that book. It's starting to come together, and it's also the first book where I'm gonna be going back and doing more revising, because things like, I don't know what curses were used in logging camps in northwest Washington in the 1850s or 1860s. And so I need to go back and do more research about that. So things like that, you know, there's more research involved in that. This one, Apsara, even though it's 12th century Cambodia, it felt like very normal to me. I knew a lot about it, and the research was very easy.
Did I misunderstand you? Did you say curses or cursing?
Cursing, curses, swear words.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that research ought to be easy in this country, I would think. There's
It's
still enough old loggers around here that can help you out, I think.
Yeah, and cursing has changed. So in the Middle Ages and in Catholic countries, curse words, and in Quebec, you know, when I lived in Montreal, I mean, the curse words were all religious. You know, you take the Lord's name in vain. You know, that's what a curse was. For the Germans, it's all about fecal material. You know, they're very, you know, if it's came out the other end, it's a bad thing, and the Germans are going to celebrate it with curses. You know, and now in the 20th century in the United States, we're more into, you know, sexual cursing.
And in a lot of cases, it was an art form.
Shakespeare was pretty good at it. So, yeah, anyway, so I don't do anything regularly. So far, my characters have been willing to talk to me even when I abandon them for months. And I'm grateful. That's great.
So how many books have you written?
I've only written 2,
Those
and
two.
I've got a third one.
Yeah.
Well, I would have said it was almost done, but it's not. I now know it's not, because I had, on a book tour I did I guess it was last week, I discovered Farewell Bend of the Snake River, which is not Farewell Bend. The Farewell Bend in Bend, Oregon, that was not the Farewell Bend for the pioneers, no matter what Wikipedia tells you. So it's changed some things, and so I don't know exactly. I know something's changed, but I don't know what, because I haven't sat down to write anymore.
So how long did it take you to write your first book?
The first book was about 8 years.
What?
Yeah, I was working full time, and
Sure.
I don't know what all. I was doing lots of stuff, and it wasn't a top priority. The second book I would have written in probably 8 or 9 months, but I also wrote a 2-volume memoir for my grandchildren and took care of a 2-year-old full time in Cambodia. So, and I also taught health and first aid to, you know, university students in Cambodia. So I didn't focus on it. It took longer. And this one is probably going to be, at the rate I'm going, probably 2 years, because I'm going away. I don't know how many of my research books I'm going to be able to fit in my suitcases. I'm going to Cambodia on Monday. Well, I'm not going Monday. I'm going to Seattle Monday and then Cambodia on Halloween. So,
For a long time?
yeah, 5 months.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Nice.
I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. At the time,
It's
it seemed
the
like a
winter.
good idea.
The winter months.
Yeah.
Are you gonna live there?
My daughter lives there, so.
Oh, that's right.
And her partner is Japanese, and he grew up with his mother's parents lived in the home, so he's used to having Achan, which is granny, living in the house. That's very wonderful. So, anyway.
Ask you a question.
Yeah.
I have a little problem with first, second, third person stuff.
Uh-huh.
And how to portray it. And I've written different ways, first and second person, where you talk about your own self, you know, but I'm still a little confused with that. That's okay.
Okay.
See if you
So, first person is I do this. Second person is, yeah, you did this. And third person is, you know, the people were doing blah de blah. So it's progressively more distant. I use a lot of dialogue, so I haven't written anything in the first person. I mean, I used to write a lot of memoirs, so that was all first person. But now everything is third person, but the dialogue makes it very immediate. So there's a lot of back and forth between the characters that brings it, you know, maybe brings the reader into it more deeply. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it's still a little confusing to me, so, but, I'm starting to understand it.
And maybe the thing to do is see, you know, find somebody who can, you know, read, you know, maybe 10 pages with you, or read 10 pages and then tell you what they think, because it can be confusing if you start out with 1/10 or one person and then.
I tried that before, but the problem is that the other person has to tell you what needs to be changed.
Oh, yeah.
So then it's not your writing anymore.
Exactly. That's why you have to, to me, it was really important, particularly with the first book, to protect my baby writer self. And I had people that were not safe. I knew they weren't safe. I had a brother, he just died, and I have two brothers. One of them was very supportive and I could read to him and he loved it. The other one, I told him right up front, I'm writing a book. When it's done, if you want, I'll give it to you and you can read it. But I'm not gonna talk with you about it because you're critical. And that's not safe for me, and if I let you criticize me, then I won't write. So, and you know, one of his, I don't know what you call it, the daughter of his wife, after he died, we're sitting in the living room, you know, he's in the bed dead, and we're all sitting around, and she just suddenly turns to me and says, you know, Andrew's love language was criticism. And it just shocked me because it was completely true. He thought that he was showing his love and helping you improve. Yeah, but I couldn't have anybody do that with my book. So, yeah, you want to find, if you have like real specific things you want them to do, your reader.
Yeah. I thought about it before, I sent some stuff to my sisters who read a lot and stuff.
Mhm.
Didn't even look at it. It wasn't my writing, but I do, I'm a journalist, investigative journalist, so the stuff I'm writing about now, which I can now because I don't have to work or nothing, and it's all mostly, it's real. So, murders and missing persons and stuff like that. Those are all the stories, and I sent them a bunch, and I thought, well, maybe this would be nice. You know, family stuff, we get along. They didn't care. We don't understand this stuff.
Oh.
Okay. Well, now it's just a pile of their homes, and I don't talk to them at all.
Oh, right. Well, you could ask for it back.
Yeah, well, I get that stuff. I get a lot of stuff. So.
Tell you what, why don't I start reading?
Okay.
I'm going to start with this book. This is also available as an audiobook because I recorded it in a studio in Cambodia last year. And I'll skip around in the first chapter a little bit. So I'll read a couple of paragraphs to give you a sense of what life is like. Chapter 1, 1184, Chosen. For as long as she could remember, Prayachan Bopha had loved to dance. When the troops came through her village, she would go with her brothers and sister to watch. At home, she would try to remember exactly each gesture and movement. She would dance to the river, a wooden bucket in each hand. On the way back, the buckets heavy and sloshing wet over her legs, she walked slowly, but her mind was still dancing. Her family called her Bopha, which meant flower. Her full name was Prayachan Bopha, moonflower. The moon was full on the night you were born, Mdea said, and you were as beautiful as a flower. I had waited so long for a girl. Your father had his boys, and I loved them, but I wanted you to be a girl. It was a long and fancy name for a village girl, but no one teased her. No one dared. Her 5 older brothers protected her and her little sister Reesmay, who was just starting to walk. Reesmay had been born in the middle of the day during hot season. Bopha danced in the shadows between the stilts and listened to her mother groan in the house above. Early that morning, shortly after her father and brothers had gone to the fields, Mdea told her to go get their neighbor Peach. Tell her it's time and ask her to come. So then the king's man, the king has sent out an emissary all over the land to find the most talented dancers, children who are dancers, and bring them back to train at Angkor Wat. And there's a contest, and Bopha is one of 3 winners. And so she's chosen to leave, and very exciting. And now she's gone home, and at daylight, you know, they've got to go back to the center of the village, to the Sangat, the administrative hub of the village, and then she'll head out. Bopha woke in the dark. She could hear her father's slight snore, her brother's quiet sleeping breaths. Reesmay was curled into her on the small pallet they shared. Even though she couldn't see, Bopha knew from the sound that Reesmay had 2 fingers in her mouth. She listened, but couldn't hear her mother. Gently and silently, Bopha uncurled from Reesmay and stood. The birds were still sleeping, but night insects hummed and creaked. A toke suddenly squawked loudly, "Toke!" under her feet, and Bopha caught her breath involuntarily, even though she knew the sound well. A big one lived in the beams under the floor, a sign that their home was blessed. Was that what had woken her? And a toke is a kind of big lizard. There's a glossary in the front of the book. She could see a little in the dimness now and made her way around her sleeping family. Mdea wasn't in her spot next to Opuk. Bopha lifted the cloth that covered the door. Slipping outside, she stopped. There was a dark shadow in the courtyard. When a cloud lifted from the half-moon sky, Bopha could see the shadow was Mdea, kneeling at the family altar under their big neem tree. She smelled incense. She climbed quietly down the ladder and joined her mother, who glanced at her, then closed her eyes again, hands in sampeya at her forehead. The ground was cool and gritty under Bopha's knees. Mdea had put a stick of precious incense into the clay pot filled with sand, which sat on the wooden platform of their family altar. She could make out in front of the incense a small banana and a white lump on a banana leaf that was likely rice. Her mother was making a special offering, but why in the middle of the night? She knew better than to interrupt her mother's silent prayer. After what seemed like ages, when the incense was nearly burned down to the sand, Mdea took a deep breath and lowered her hands. "Why are you up in the middle of the night?" she asked her daughter. In the moonlight, Bopha saw tears gleaming in her eyes. "I just woke up. I don't know why. Why are you making an offering in the middle of the night?" "When everyone gets up, I will be too busy," Mdea said, pulling Bopha so close she could feel the new baby jumping in Mdea's tummy. She laughed quietly. "The baby is jumping. Is he happy to be outside with you in the night?" Mdea smiled and released her daughter. "This is a very busy baby, he or she. I will miss your help." Bopha could see the smile fade as she said it. "But what are you praying for?" Bopha asked. "I'm asking Buddha and all the gods and all the spirits of the forest to protect you on your journey and in your new life," Mdea said. Bopha had forgotten. Even when Mdea said she would miss her help, Bopha hadn't remembered, but now she did and felt like she had when the water buffalo calf ran into her. Her chest was tight. "I don't want to leave you," she whispered. "I know," Mdea said, hugging her again. It's a big honor to be chosen to dance for the king, but it's a big change to leave here. Can't I stay? Bopha was begging, tears pouring down her face. She could feel Mdea shake her head. It will be better for you if you go. You were born to dance, but there's nothing for you here. At first it will be hard and you will miss us, but you will be so happy to be a dancer and you will meet new friends. Imagine seeing the temples of Angkor. Bopha had, of course, heard about Angkor. Her oldest brother said it was only half a day's walk to the big road that led there. He told her about the 5 tall towers and all the monks who lived there. Their village had only a very small wat with 3 monks. One was so old and shriveled that Bopha didn't know how he could even walk. Their house was close to the wat, and the old monk would stagger into their yard every morning and hold out his bowl in trembling hands. Mdea always saved a special treat for him, maybe pouring sugar syrup onto rice, or giving him 2 of the sweet little bananas Bopha loved so much. Can I come back to visit? She asked. Maybe, said Mdea, getting to her feet. That would be nice. I'd love to hear all your adventures. As long as they were already outside, they went to the bushes before climbing the ladder. By now, Bopha could see the sky had gotten much lighter with pink streaks in the gray. Let's start cooking now, she said to her mother. I don't think I can go back to sleep. Me either, said Mdea, smiling a little. Good idea. They worked quietly, the tasks known so well they didn't need more light. Bopha got some twigs from the firewood pile. Mdea squatted by the pot that kept the embers overnight in a bed of ash. She scooped out layers of ash, then carefully lifted a few chunks and put them in the fire pit. She blew gently and the chunks went pink, then orange. Bopha carefully laid the twigs in a crisscross pattern over the chunks while Mdea continued to blow until there were a few tiny flickers of flame on the twigs. Bopha brought bigger sticks. While Bopha blew on the fire and fed it more wood, Mdea dipped water from the cistern. She got rice from the big covered storage basket. It was now less than a quarter full. She hoped the gods would bless them with a good harvest by the time the new baby was eating. With Bopha gone to the king, there would be one less mouth to feed until then. The family clattered to life upstairs, the boys pushing each other on the ladder until Opuk said, "Chop!" Bopha wasn't hungry suddenly, but she squatted with her banana leaf plate and ate a few bites of rice and a banana. Her stomach was fluttery. After the meal, Opuk gathered them at the altar and lit incense. As he prayed, Bopha caught glimpses of her brothers looking at her solemnly, almost in awe. She was going to dance for the king. They would stay in the village, walking behind a water buffalo, squatting in a rice paddy, planting, weeding, and harvesting. Bopha had wrapped her Rumdal sampot. Sampot is a long piece of cloth that's wrapped around the hips, and it was all that anybody in 12th century Cambodia ever wore, except for jewelry, and soldiers going to war would wear a leather vest. Bopha had wrapped her Rumdal sampot in a wooden comb and a new blue and white chroma Mdea gave her. She wore her everyday sampot with its stains and a few worn spots. The only other thing she owned was a thin gold arm bangle. Mdea pushed the bangle up onto her arm as high as it would go and handed her the knotted chroma. Bopha held onto her mother tightly, the unborn baby kicking her away. Mdea gently put her hands on the little girl's shoulders and held her away. "Go in peace, my child," she said softly. Opuk looked at the sky, now almost fully light. "It's time," he said, and started to walk toward the Sangat, his family straggling behind. Bopha turned back to look at the house and the neem tree. A farm cat came out of the shadows, stubby tail held high. It looked at her briefly, then sat down and started to groom. Many of the villagers had come to the Sangat to see the 3 dancers leave and to get another glimpse of the king's man. This morning he was wearing a deep green sampot with yellow vines. A teenage boy held the reins of a big brown horse off to one side of the courtyard. The horse's mane was braided tightly and evenly, and on his back was a thick brown blanket. Several men and a few women stood nearby, dressed more formally than the villagers. The Sangat leader, quite a lot shorter than the king's man, stood stiffly next to him. As the first rays of the sun hit the peak of the Sangat roof, the leader stepped forward. "Bring the dancers here!" Opuk touched Bopha's shoulder, and she followed him into the center. Dara and Sopeya came out of the crowd, following their fathers. The 3 men and 3 children stopped in front of the leader and bowed. The leader gestured to the men, "Leave now!" Opuk didn't touch Bopha's shoulder this time, but he nodded and smiled into her eyes. He bowed again to the Sangat leader and more deeply to the king's man, then returned to Mdea's side. The king's man spoke. "Thank you for the gift of these dancers. May the king's blessing be on us all." He turned and walked to the horse. The teenage boy cupped his hands, and the king's man stepped into them, then up onto the horse in one fluid motion. The teenager handed him the reins. Without a backward glance, the king's man urged the horse forward, and the nearby men fell in line behind him. The children in the middle of the courtyard weren't sure what to do. "Go!" bellowed the Sangat leader. 2 of the women, standing where the horse had been, waved to them with "come here" gestures. Sopeya immediately went, Bopha following, still a little uncertain. As the caravan trailed along the high embankment between brilliant green rice paddies, the villagers seemed to wake up and started to follow. They could easily have kept up with the procession, but there was no room on the path for more than 2 abreast. Besides, the excitement was over, and there was work to do. Even Bopha's brothers soon gave up and stood watching as their sister got smaller and smaller against the dull brown path. Opuk called them, and they turned and followed him. Mdea was hugging Rizme to her chest, resting the little girl on the shelf of her pregnant belly. 2 of the women in the procession were behind Bopha, and soon Mdea couldn't see her daughter. With wet eyes, Mdea returned to her home. Today, she would have to take Rizme to the river to get water for the family. She's off on her new life.
Did you do a lot of research?
I did a lot of research, but the story kind of came out and fell into place. There were things I didn't know that I did have to look up, like what a funeral was like in 12th century Cambodia. And the main sources, there are a whole bunch of historical references and notes in the back of the book. At the Temple of Bayon, which is the one built by the most famous king in Cambodian history and the one that Bopha ended up going to, there are bas-reliefs carved in every gallery. The galleries are maybe 50 meters long, and each, there are layers of galleries around each side of the temples as they go up, and they're all carved intricately. Most of them are carved at Angkor Wat, which is Hindu, with Hindu scriptures, scenes from the Ramayana and other Hindu legends. And at Bayon, there are stories of the invasion of the Cham and Jayavarman and his armies going and chasing the Cham back out and celebrating their victory. But one gallery, 3 tiers of carvings, is of everyday life. What people wore, what they did, what they were eating. And so that's one way that we know what happened, because if it wasn't in stone or metal, the jungle ate it. About 80 years after this book ended, the Chinese sent an emissary to Cambodia, and he stayed for several years, and he was fascinated with all aspects of Cambodian life. And he wrote back to China detailed reports on everything. And the Chinese had the technology to keep records, and so those records still exist. So between the bas-reliefs at Bayon and the writings of this Chinese emissary, we know actually quite a bit about what life was like during that time.
It's interesting you put a horse in there, because I just would never associate, I would think of a water buffalo or, something like that rather than a horse. And as you were reading, I thought, well, there's only one horse.
One
and
horse.
the man is on the horse.
That's exactly
and
right.
everybody else is following the
That's
man
exactly
on the
right.
horse.
That's exactly right.
So-
Now, there were
Yeah,
cavalry.
the
When the
key,
king
yes.
went to war, there were cavalry.
Right.
But yeah, their horses. It's not a country conducive to horseback riding. Only at certain times of the year when the roads are dry. Dry season, you can ride.
Well,
And then elephants, of course, they used elephants, but more in war and for ceremonies and things like that.
so you looked at all of their aspects as far as what they ate and right on down to the bottom. 'Cause it was,
Yes.
yeah, it was-
And also, when you're in Cambodia and you get outside the cities and into the villages, sometimes it's very clear that this hasn't changed in thousands of years.
Is your book available in Cambodia?
It is actually.
And how was it received?
Well, that's a good question. It's been received well, and this year when I go, I want to present a copy to the king and to his sister, who has been very interested in trying to reconstruct what Cambodian traditional dance was like, because between the country as a whole devolved from this really massive, wealthy civilization that had emissaries going all over the known world to, much smaller villages, and the country scaled down and scaled down. And then the Khmer Rouge came in the 1970s. They killed anybody who could read, anybody who had glasses, because that would indicate maybe you could read, anybody who was a teacher, anybody who had been to school. Of course, they were all educated in France. They all had their master's degree.
What year?
1973 to 1980, something like that, 72 to 79. And they killed horrible numbers of people. And if you could dance, you would either pretend you'd never heard of it, or you'd have to flee. So the king's sister is trying to bring that back. And I dedicated the book to the people of Cambodia. So
The reason I ask is, it's Whitfield is probably not a Cambodian name.
not at all, and I can't pronounce anything in him. I can say a few words, but
Yeah.
It's a very difficult language for me. Very difficult language.
Did you walk on that road that Bopha walked on?
I walked on parts of it. Parts of it, they're just rediscovering. I mean, they're still discovering temples that Jayavarman built. So I've walked on some of it, but you can't. I have maps of where they were, but the jungle has taken over a lot. There's a bridge that comes into the picture in the book, and that's still used. It's used for motorbikes and pedestrians and bicycles, but not for cars.
So when you go back, are you gonna continue her story?
Nope, her story's done. I moved on.
Did you finish it? Was it birthed and finished in Cambodia?
It was birthed in Cambodia in 2013, but I didn't start until, 2020 maybe.
No.
So I did write some of it in Cambodia.
No, you certainly hooked.
Yes.
I was hooked.
Why is it such a could you do a prequel? I'm curious because I'm writing right now,
Mhm.
and I don't know, but I'm finding myself when I do things and I have to think, what would his father have done? So I'm already thinking backwards, just to get it part of the character. So, you know, I mean, her mother gave her away. She was pretty
Basically,
young.
Exactly,
So
she's about 8 years old.
what happened to her sister?
Read the book.
Oh, I get that.
That's fun.
So all you do is standalones.
So far,
Yeah.
yeah. The one after the one I'm writing now takes place in Turkey, and I know the spot, but I've never been there. That's
Well, you gotta go there before you.
before I write, yes.
Well, you can.
While I can, yeah, exactly. So maybe maybe in the fall of 2024.
So that was written in the third person.
Exactly. That was written in the third person. And this one is written in the third person. Well, yeah. Because I'll say Ralph did this, Ralph did that in the third person.
You mentioned memoirs. Have you thought about publishing your memoirs, or is it just for you?
Well, it's currently just for my grandchildren, but it's not a children's book, and I didn't edit it very well, and it's one of those, I would start with a prompt. My daughter-in-law, bless her heart, as they say in the South, gave me a prompt a week for a year, and then it would be turned into a book. It was called Storyworth.
I've done that also.
Yeah. So, yeah, you get a prompt and then you have to write. But just because the prompt says this, I can end up way over here. I don't even have any idea. If I'm looking for something in that book, I have no idea where it is. I did finally do an index, like a 3-page index to each volume so people could find things.
Are the names easy to or can I make up my own way of saying?
Oh,
them?
absolutely. You're the reader.
So-
You do what you
Yeah,
want.
but I mean,
No, you're not graded on how you pronounce it.
yeah, but I just skipped through there, and when you think of Angkor Wat, and you were talking Ba, really, and stuff like that. So, just you didn't put any definitions in there.
Well,
Or-
there's a character list,
Well, I saw the character list,
and
but I didn't
there's
see
a
anything.
glossary. There's a glossary.
Oh, there is.
Yeah, between the character list. Yeah, after the character list, there's a glossary.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Sort of minimal, but. So this is Sampaya.
It's nice.
And it's, when you go to the grocery store, the clerk, they accept the money like this, so I give my money like this, and then I receive my change like this, because that's the sort of
Did they
traditional.
pick the change out of your hand?
No, I think they don't have coins, it's all bills,
Oh, they don't.
no coins,
Oh,
so.
that's interesting.
What's the timeline like in this book? Like you mentioned, that was over the span of a year.
This is a lifetime.
Oh,
It starts in 1184 and it ends in 1218.
so no
Young.
need for a sequel, Doug.
Pretty young,
4
yeah.
to 1218, not that long, maybe 40 years.
Yeah. Well, how do you price them? Do you
They price, the cost is based on how big the book is, so I'm delighted that this book here, I had to charge $22 for it. That one now is $20 because it's fewer words, fewer pages, costs less to print. I guess you can just pick what you want. Oh, that's true for Amazon, which is all I know, KDP.
Okay.
Okay, another technical. On here you have Pearl, and here you have Bi-Pearl. Why is that?
Well, that's a really good question. And I have no answer for it.
Oh.
This one I worked with a guy in South Africa, and I don't know if he put the buy in
You
or
better
what.
write a memoir. You keep popping up with these.
Well, I found him on the internet because I was, trying to.
Named Wilbur?
I was looking for somebody to help format it, and I sent a message to KDP asking if they had people that they suggested. And they answered back, no, we don't, we can send you a list. And the same day, I got an email from a guy saying, you know, I work for KDP, but on the sideline, I also help authors with their own books.
So that's nice. That's nice.
So I told him what I wanted. I took the pictures, front and back cover, and told him what I wanted. This other cover was done by a friend of mine who actually she thought that the store was a main character, and I knew I wanted the store on the cover. But so she, you know, we went back and forth a bunch of times about what the store was like, and it was kind of cool to work with a real artist that way.
Is that a painting?
It's a painting, original painting by Montana Lee Masters.
Gorgeous.
And I don't know why, that one was, the cover was done by WordPress, taking this painting, the coloring is completely different. Well, not completely, but you know, noticeably different. I don't know why.
The formatting of some images can make a big difference in the print process.
I didn't hear.
Oh, the formatting of pictures can make a big difference
Yes.
in the print process.
Yeah, and she had trouble finding the original one. I couldn't find the original cover to send to them, so. Anyway, it's an interesting process.
And you love it.
Well, I like the writing. I like finding out what's going to happen with my characters because I don't know. I keep a character list and a timeline as I go along, but other than that, I don't sort of impose too much.
A timeline being where you think events are going to go, or like the
No, a timeline
historical-
being what happened and
Oh, okay.
you know where I am, how old. Well, for example, how old. You know, so she came at maybe age 8, and then a couple of years. Of course, she can't tell times. You know, she doesn't do calendar. When she first, I mean, she's just a little village girl. She doesn't read. She doesn't write. You know, so it's kind of from her perspective as she matures and becomes more educated. I think maybe some, well, you could tell me. I think, you know, the way she looks at the world changes.
Are you gonna do anything and read anything or
Sure,
talk
you
about
want me to read
the
from this?
storekeeper?
Sure.
I keep saying the store.
Yeah,
The
the
storekeeper, A Tale of Small Town. And this is the second edition, and I'm
Right.
pretty sure the library has this one.
Right,
So
they actually
it's a
have
big
both
one.
now.
Yeah, that's a.
Would you like us to
Volume one and
circulate
two.
the volume 2 in favor of volume 1?
You can do whichever you want, whichever people want.
Okay.
Somebody, there are a lot of typos in the first edition, in addition to weird formatting and, you know, gutters that are somehow this big, which is the other reason the book, I didn't cut that much, but when the gutters went from this big to this big, it made a big difference. I didn't even know what a gutter was. It put me, you know, hang on your house before I started in on this. All right, I'll read from the storekeeper. The next morning, when Ralph rolled up the blind on the door, he saw the little girl was already on the step. So she hadn't been completely traumatized by the dog, Ralph thought. Today, she was looking at the door. Rusty had come down with Ralph this morning. He looked at the girl through the door and wagged his tail. He sat down and watched her while Ralph got the coffee going. When Dave opened the door, Rusty stood up to sniff him politely. "Hello, who's this?" Dave asked. "That's Rusty," Ralph said, coming toward the door. "Rusty, this is Dave." But Rusty was out the door as Dave closed it. "Rusty!" Ralph shouted. "Come!" But the door was closed. Rusty stood on the porch and looked at the door. He looked at the little girl. She looked at him. Ralph yanked open the door. "Rusty, come," he said sternly. Rusty's ears drooped. The little girl was shrunk into the corner, a tangle of tense, skinny limbs. Ralph stepped onto the porch. I don't know your name, but this is Rusty. He lives here. He just wants to be your friend, he told the wary child. Anyway, so she keeps sitting there and they make a little bit more friends. Friday morning found Ralph still in his recliner. His body was used to it after months at Ruth's bedside. The hospital bed and all her equipment filled half the living room, and at night he rearranged enough to drag the recliner up close and hold her hand. After she died and the living room returned to normal, well, there was no normal anymore, just a big emptiness, he moved the recliner back to the sitting area. But he never slept in their queen bed again, their bed. He couldn't be in it alone. Ralph and Rusty went downstairs. The morning was slightly overcast and the air had a new nip. Ralph left both the back door to the building and the back door to the store open and started to make coffee. Rusty returned in a few minutes. He now had a water bowl next to the wood stove. He gulped down half the bowl, then circled till he had the floor right and lay down. The little girl was not there when Ralph opened the blind. The boys, that's the coffee boys, ambled in and got their mugs. Today they stayed inside and talked about the change in weather and if it would be an early winter again. They sure needed a good snowpack. All the fishing holes had dried up by mid-July. Ralph listened with half his brain while he stocked the refrigerators and shelves. He didn't contribute to the conversation. When the cowbell announced Mrs. Adams, Ralph stifled a grimace. She looked like a woman on a mission. Marching over to the counter, she began her interrogation. I see you inherited the brat. Did you pay extra for her? Ralph looked past her and saw the little girl in her corner on the steps. He realized he didn't even know her name. After a week, he'd never heard her make a sound. Excuse me, he said. Loretta had a good heart, but she could never set a limit, Mrs. Adams continued shrilly. The boys' conversation stilled. She never knew when helping wasn't helping. That little girl is nothing but trouble. I've seen her here every day, and it doesn't look like anyone else is going to tell you. She shot a venomous glance at the boys, who began to take their mugs to the back and wash them. Mrs. Adams, that little girl, hasn't done me any harm. She just sits there and watches the street. She's quiet. She never comes inside. She's quiet because she can't talk, Mr. Johnson. That's why she's quiet. She's retarded, and she's retarded because of her mother. The boys sidled out past Mrs. Adams. That's right. You boys just go right on out of here like you had nothing to do with it, Mrs. Adams spat. Everyone knows what her mother does, but no one knows who sired that girl. Ralph was stunned. His shock registered on the upright Christian lady in front of him. She collected her face and lowered her voice. Her permed head nodded apologetically. I'm sorry to be the one, Mr. Johnson, but you should know the truth before you go getting suckered. Well, where does she live? Ralph managed. That shack out past the railroad tracks, next street over from your backyard. I didn't know anyone lived there, he said. I thought it was abandoned. I never see a light there or any sign of life. The shack was a misfit in the town, which generally was well kept. He figured it was just a leftover from when the railroads ran regularly. It leaned like it couldn't last another snow load, and the windows were mostly covered with cardboard. It is abandoned. Jessie squats there, and the police don't do a thing. We've tried at the church to help Jessie, but she doesn't want help. She needs to go to jail, and the little girl needs to go to a home. The little girl was staring through the door at him. Ralph wondered if she'd heard Mrs. Adams. How much did she understand? Could she even hear? Lucky for Ralph, the phone rang. He lifted the receiver, which had to be an antique. How many phones still had that rotary dial and heavy black handset? L&B's, how can I help you? He crooned. Mrs. Adams watched a moment, then started checking the shelves. Ralph, this is Gloria over at the senior center. Do you have sugar? We've run out, and I'm in the middle of baking this month's birthday cake. Oh, hi, Gloria. Yeah, we got plenty of sugar. I'll have a bag ready for you. Thanks a million, Ralph. You're a lifesaver. I'll bring you a piece of cake this afternoon. That would be fine, Gloria, glad I can help. Ralph breathed a sigh of relief when he hung up and wondered if there was somewhere to hide. Dream on, you're a one-man operation here, buddy, his mind replied. He decided it was time to do more restocking and went out back until he heard the cowbell. There's a cowbell that dangs everybody in. Gloria came up to the counter. Mrs. Adams immediately appeared with her basket. Gloria took the sugar with more thanks. As Ralph totted up Mrs. Adams' total and wrote it in her account book, he decided she was right. He shouldn't be suckered any longer. He would make a sign announcing a new store policy. No more credit accounts. Debit accounts welcome. People could deposit money to their accounts and he would debit purchases. When they reached zero, they'd need to put down some more money. Mrs. Adams walked down the steps as far away from the little girl as possible, like she might catch something if she got too close. Ralph decided he wanted to know the little girl's name. He got a donut and a small carton of milk and started toward the door. Then he went back for a napkin and a straw. As soon as he opened the door, Rusty went through it and sat down near the little girl. She shrank back, but didn't seem as tense. Ralph pulled up his rocker and offered her the donut and milk. She looked at him. So, what's your name? You come here every day, but I don't know your name. I thought you might like a little something. Rusty looked at the donut and started to drool. Not for you, Rusty, it's for your friend. I'll get you a biscuit later. When he heard biscuit, Rusty wagged his long tail. A few leaves had collected on the porch overnight, and his tail caught them and scritched across the boards. The little girl looked at Rusty's tail. Look at that, Ralph thought. She can definitely hear. The dirty little hand reached tentatively toward Ralph's. Go ahead, Ralph encouraged. Take it. I'll open the milk for you. The skinny fingers closed on the donut. Rusty watched the transaction closely but didn't move. The little girl broke off a piece of donut and put it in her mouth. Ralph was trying to get the paper off the straw, but he could see something change in her face. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but a satisfied relaxation. He realized he had been holding his breath and exhaled. There you go, I finally got that dang wrapper off, he exclaimed and handed her the milk carton. Both hands full now, the little girl hesitated. She looked at Rusty, then put the donut between her feet and took a sip of milk. Then another, and another. She put the carton between her feet and broke off another piece of donut. Ralph caught himself staring. Well, okay then, he said, I guess I'll sweep the porch. He brought out the broom and watched surreptitiously as he cleared the leaves. When there was just one little piece of donut left, the little girl looked at it. Then she looked at Rusty's, whose eyes had not left her. She put the piece down on the porch between her and the big dog. He watched, but didn't move. She looked up at Ralph, who had stopped sweeping. It's okay, Rusty, you can eat it, Ralph said. Your friend is giving you a treat. Rusty's long pink tongue instantly looped around the morsel and his leafy tail scritched back and forth. And this is a really good example of not having any idea what's going to happen in the book. I had no clue when Mrs. Adams came in what was going to happen. It was horrifying.
Did
Yes.
you do an audiobook of this?
I haven't done an audiobook of
Oh,
this.
you do the voices
Yeah.
so well. You like create an atmosphere for each person.
Thank you. It's possible. The studio is still there. There's one character in the book who's from St. Lucia in the Virgin Islands, and I have trouble with her accent. I don't know. And plus, I have judgments. In an audiobook, I feel like I sound like I breathe too much.
Well, I think your character development's good. I know Mrs. Adams.
And the voice.
And the
probably,
voice.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you think you know Mrs. Adams. It changes. It's interesting how it happens. The thing is, it's almost like, as I say, it's like for me watching a movie. Once I sit down and start to write a little bit, and I'll reread the previous chapters so I kind of am up to speed with where I am, and then just, it's like, I can see it, I can see everything. So, I think this would make a great Hallmark movie, this one. I'm not averse to Hallmark movies.
Well, that's a good point. When you write, do you see it?
I do.
Is it a movie?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Usually.
So you need to give it agent and pitch it to Hallmark.
You know, I considered it, and then, what's it called? Well, I didn't consider the agent part. And then, COVID happened. And then there was the strike.
Yeah.
Maybe I might. I don't even know, how you get a book to. I mean, this would easily turn into a screenplay. I could easily make it a screenplay.
Send it to Reese Witherspoon.
I did send it to Reese
Did you?
Witherspoon. I did, well, I didn't. I sent her Apsara. I don't think I sent her The Storekeeper. I'll send the second edition of The Storekeeper. We'll see what happens. And I sent The Storekeeper to Kirkus. So, Kirkus Reviews is a big, I'd never heard of them, but they do book reviews. And they're big in the publishing industry, and I gather librarians read those reviews.
I've never heard of Kirkus, but I definitely read many, many reviews.
Anyway, I haven't heard of it. A librarian is the person who told me about it.
well, you should send it to something like Costco, because they have a super review on their
Interesting, I never thought of Costco.
Yeah, they have a super review.
I did send it to a pastor I met on Facebook from South Carolina that he wanted to know if I was related to the Dodds that wrote the book about Jonathan Edwards' wife, which I am. That was my mom. And so anyway, we've communicated back and forth. And I suddenly thought that would be a good book for a Christian women's group, book group, I think. So he might have one at his church.
What about the ending? You could
The ending?
figure out the ending first.
No, although with The Storekeeper, about 3/4 of the way through, I had a sense of how it might end. And this one, I actually knew what the end was before I began. That's what I started with. I was just actually literally, I was in the museum in Siem Reap, and I had to lie down. I couldn't stand up another second. And there was a stone bench, and I lay down, and the last chapter happened.
Amazing.
And it just knocked me out, because I won't give it away. Okay.
Do you have any of the audio with you?
Oh, what audio?
That what
Like a
you're reading it, a little excerpt with your voice reading.
Oh, yeah, on my Facebook page, I do have excerpts. I think I've read actually the first and second chapter of The Storekeeper. But it's just in several snippets on the Facebook page. And Amazon has, or Audible, I guess, Audible has a 5-minute, 6-minute excerpt of Apsara. So you can listen to it.
Do you do Goodreads?
Haven't. I don't even know how you do that.
I think you have to make a profile and add your books, and then people can add reviews. That's one of the main ones that I use.
I didn't do it, but I think somebody else did it. Because I think I'm on Goodreads. I think there may have been another person, some friend who did it for me. But look up on Goodreads and tell me.
Did you get a picture of a young girl and put it on your desk or wherever you write?
No, I didn't.
A little weight.
No. But the book I'm writing now, I definitely have images, and also for the one that takes place in Turkey, I've got a lot of images for that. The Storekeeper, not so much, just mostly the store, and I drew the original picture for the store. Yeah.
And listening to you, it sounds like that was in your head and as a reel for quite a few years.
Yes.
She knows those people.
Well, it wouldn't play all, I'd only play when I sat down to write. Although things are starting to happen with the current book, it is intruding into my normal days. That's kind of fun.
We'd love
And
to
part
have
of me
you
is
back.
starting to live,
Since she lives so.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back when you finish that third book.
okay, sounds like a plan.
Okay. Anybody have any more questions? We're hitting a little bit beyond the hour.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would like 2 of these just.
Yeah, and if anybody's wondering, we have the Artist's Way here to check out as well.
Yes.
The book she was talking about at the beginning.
I don't know if you get the same benefit if you do it in the recommended 3 months, or if you get more out of it if you wait 8 years. I still write longhand, not every day, but I often will write. I don't write books longhand, but I'll center myself.
You use a word processor or a computer.
Yeah, I actually iPad.
Oh.
I've done everything on
Impressive.
I was gonna say, cause that's.
I have a remote keyboard,
Okay.
a Bluetooth keyboard and an
Yeah.
iPad. Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
It's fun. And so they're, actually, well, here they can just be $15 each, so would you like me to sign it?
Well, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
Is that like another 15?
Yes, it's
I
much
would
more
try it.
expensive.
That's a beautiful thing.